Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, so if you can find a seat, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the launch of the Well Mental and Spiritual Care. My name, yes, yeah. My name is Amanda Rigby, and I am the executive director of the Well. And I also have the privilege of serving as one of the pastors here at Edenton Street United Methodist Church. This is such an exciting evening for so many of us. The Well has been, as you'll hear in a little bit, a dream that has been coming into fruition for years now. And we couldn't be more grateful that all of you are here today to help us celebrate that. We want to thank you for your support, for your encouragement, for your interest in the conversation about mental and spiritual health in the community, and for your investment in this ongoing conversation. And we are so grateful for you. We have a wonderful evening of celebration and conversation planned tonight. You'll get to hear from an expert in the fields of psychiatry and theology. You'll hear the origin story of the Well. You'll hear about our values and our approaches, and you'll be invited to participate in this conversation in the community about mental and spiritual care in multiple ways this evening. To begin our time together, I am incredibly excited to introduce our guest speaker to you. Dr. Warren Kinghorn is a psychiatrist and a theological ethicist. He teaches at Duke University Medical Center and Duke Divinity School, and also practices at the Durham VA Medical Center. In all of his ample spare time, he also co-directs the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School. His work focuses on the intersections of Christian faith and mental health, on the theological dimensions of trauma and moral injury, and on the role of therapeutic relationships in psychiatric prescribing. When we began planning for this event, Dr. Kinghorn was the very first person we thought of to bring us a word of hope and healing to this gathering. And so we're so honored by his presence here with us today. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Warren Kinghorn.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks to all of you for turning out on such a nice summer night. It's lovely, and it's really great to see this room full. I've not been at Edenton Street for several years, so it's really great to be back. I'm Warren Kinghorn. As Amanda said, I'm a psychiatrist at Duke and also the Durham VA. I saw at least one VA colleague here tonight, so welcome if there's more. And also co-direct the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School. And we don't offer clinical care like the Well does and will, but we do offer education. And so if any of you are involved in the world of mental health and you want to study in a seminary and specifically do so with a focus on healthcare and mental health, come and see me and we can talk about that. But I'm not here tonight to talk about our work at Duke. I'm here tonight to be the warm-up act for the Well, and I'm really happy to be so. I'm just really happy to be here tonight. The question I think that we want to engage together for this first period is, like, why is it that Christians can and should care about mental health? And I think this is a question that all of us in the room have our own stories that we're engaging with. And I think the broadest answer is that Christians should care about mental health because God loves us and God cares when we struggle. And so even if there was only one person in all of Wake County that was really struggling, God would care about that, and it would be something that the church should be engaged and involved with. And it's the case that it's not just one person. Mental health challenges are incredibly common. So now that you're all here and comfortable and seated, I want to ask some of you to stand. If you're able. If your birthday is between January 1st and March 15th, then if you're willing, please stand briefly. All right. Please stay standing for just a minute. So my birthday is March 16th, so I wouldn't stand, but I'm really happy birthday for those of you that stood up. This is about the number of people in this room, not necessarily these particular people, but about the number of people in this room that in a government survey called the Household Pulse Survey have symptoms consistent with a depressive disorder. So about the number of people in this room right now. Now, you all, thank you for standing. You can sit down. If your birthday is between October 1st and December 31st, please stand. Okay, thank you for standing. Again, not necessarily these particular people, but this is about the number of people in this room that have currently have symptoms consistent with an anxiety disorder right now? Thank you all for standing. You can sit down. Mental health challenges are incredibly common, and I think we can, I'll just say next slide for the next slide. We can see here that if we look not just at symptoms consistent with a depressive disorder, but in government data, you can see here that in 2021, 8.3% of American adults lived with a full diagnosis of major depressive disorder. You can see that that was even much higher among young adults ages 18 to 25. It was about 18.6%. Next slide. If we look at all mental disorders together, then the same survey estimates that about 1 out of 4 Americans in any given year will meet criteria for a mental health challenge or mental disorder. And of course, you can see some pretty significant age differences there, with young adults especially affected. Next slide. This is a curve that we hope will start to go down soon, but many of you have heard this data, but this is a pretty stark curve of deaths by overdose, drug-involved overdose deaths in the United States, which in 2021 passed 100,000 deaths for the first time. Of course, many of you are likely affected by the opioid crisis and know people who are. This is, of course, not just substance use issues, but also a broad range of mental health issues that contributes to this number, as well as people just feeling disconnected and like they don't have a place in their communities and have a hard time finding hope for the future. Next slide. So I want you to know, and we could go on and on about the prevalence of mental health challenges, but you all don't need to hear that because you're here tonight. You already care about these questions. And I want to name that whenever we talk about mental health, it's not just something that involves people somehow out there in Raleigh or Durham, but it's our stories right here in this room, that many of us in this room are struggling right now with mental health challenges and depression and anxiety and other things. And my word to you and our word to you collectively tonight, if that's you, know that you matter and don't give up and you're not alone and there's help for you. And so one of the reasons I'm so happy to be here as the warm up for the well is because this is a way to offer this kind of help for not only folks here at Edenton Street, but for all of Wake County and the region. Next slide. So I want to talk though about how might Christians think maybe distinctively about mental health and mental health care. And I think one challenge is that in the world of mental health care, it's surprisingly easy to get into a way of thinking about people as machines who break and who need to be fixed. Now, I'm not saying this applies to all forms of mental health care. I work at the VA. We try really hard to provide good, holistic, person-centered care for our patients and clients, but my goodness, it's really easy in clinical training to get into the model of like just thinking of people as like some kind of machines that just need to be tweaked or fixed. And I think Christians need to resist that. Next slide. So if you want to build a model of mental health care that is a kind of industry that treats people as machines to be fixed, here's how you would do it. You would take people's unwanted experience, anxiety or depression or something else, and you call those symptoms. And then you cluster those symptoms into names that are diagnoses like depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder. And then the person begins to kind of leave the scene. You say, well, what we have before us is depression or anxiety. So then we need to just apply technologies to these symptoms. Those can be medications, those can be somatic treatments, those can be psychotherapies. But the point is, like, we just need to apply the right technique to reduce the symptoms. And of course, if you can show in clinical studies that those techniques work, they become evidence-based therapies, and then you can buy them and sell them. So you can have an industry that's the mental health care system. Now, there's many things to be said that are really good about that. I want, when I saw my patients this morning at the VA, to prescribe medications that are evidence-based and that are shown to be helpful in clinical trials. And that's what the clinicians at the well are going to want to offer to clients who come to them. But we shouldn't get so fixed on the idea that people are just collections of symptoms that they stop being whole human persons. Next slide. So a couple of problems with this. This is from a published study. This was a middle-aged African-American woman who told a set of researchers, I told the doctor I was depressed and he put me on Prozac. He put me on more medication when I don't need it. I'm not taking that medication because I was just simply depressed, and that was it. The doctor never took time to find out why I was depressed. All he said was, oh, you're depressed. I'm going to give you some medication for that. He never asked me anything. He just wrote the prescription down and gave it to me. Now that you might say, no one would ever do that, but that's actually not an uncommon kind of experience for some people at certain times. Next slide. But even when the clinicians do listen, I think we have to be careful about thinking about mental health care just as reducing symptoms. And it's because what if often people come into care because they just want to get back to work. They want to get back to school, get back to work, get back to the demands of productivity that we all feel in our lives. But what if part of the problem is that we're depressed and anxious because we live in a culture and communities where we're constantly stretched and made to feel underproductive or counterproductive? And then we go to a therapist or a clinician or a psychiatrist to say, I just want to become more productive. And so we get a treatment to try to make us more productive or better producers of whatever we're seeking to do. And then we get fed right back into the system that's causing the problem to begin with. I think that's a real concern that I have as a clinician. Like, how do I name the problems that are actually there and not simply kind of feed a culture that in many ways is broken? That's where I think Christian faith matters. Next slide. So let me just briefly offer 4 Christian affirmations about what it means to be human that I think matter for mental health, I think matter for the work that the Well's doing, and why I'm excited to be here tonight. Next slide. The first affirmation and the most important thing that I'll say tonight is that, and if nothing else sticks, remember this, that the deepest truth of who we are as human beings is that we're fully known and loved by God. And that's something that as Christians we can cling to and can base ourselves on, that we don't just show up in the world seeking meaning as these biological organisms that somehow are cast adrift, but we come into the world loved and known by God. And I love how the Catholic philosopher Joseph Pieper talks about this when he writes about when God sees the world and God saw it was very good. Pieper says, next slide, it's as if God is looking at us and saying, it's good that you exist. It's good that you're in this world. It's good that you exist. It's good that you're in this world. And I think part of the work of the Well, and part of the work of how Christians can contribute to the world of mental health is to say to each other and to ourselves, it's good that you exist. It's good that you're in this world. We can proclaim that to each other because that's what God says to us. Next slide. The second thing that I would say Christians have to offer to the world of mental health care is the awareness that we're creatures of earth. We're bodies. We live as bodies. We're made of the dust. And so, of course, mental illness, mental health challenges happen in our bodies. They're embodied things. We feel in our bodies and brains the weight of these. And so all of the research about how mental illness happens in our brains and bodies is consistent with Christian faith. And, next slide, we're not just, though, bodies. We're relational creatures. We find ourselves, we love, we grow in relationship with God and with others and with the natural world around us. So we're bodies, we're creatures of dust, and we find ourselves in relationship. So this, I think, next slide, this, I think, leads to the need to think broadly about, like, why is it that we struggle in Durham and Raleigh? Why is it that we struggle in our culture? It's not just what's happening in our bodies, although it's that. It's also what's happening in our world. This is not a theological book, but many of you have read this book by the journalist Joanne Hari called Lost Connections. Hari's a British journalist, and he writes about the experience of being a young man and being depressed and taking medication and thinking that medication's helping. He's not against medication, but it's not really getting to the core of the problem. And he began to wonder, what if the epidemic of depression and anxiety in our culture is not that our genes have changed or that our brains have dramatically changed, but what if it's that we live in a culture that no longer meets our basic psychological needs? That we live in a culture where we increasingly feel disconnected from meaningful work and from other people and from meaningful values that are life-giving, from childhood trauma, from status and respect, from the natural world around us, from a hopeful or secure future. What if that's what's driving a lot of struggle in all around us? Well, in that case, those are relational challenges, relational problems, and we need to think on that level about maybe what's causing the trouble. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. Next slide. The third thing that I've offered, so I said we're known and loved by God. We are creatures of earth who find ourselves in relationship. The third thing that I'd want to just affirm is that we're not machines, we are wayfarers. We're creatures who are on a journey. And Christians believe that we are from God as our source and our creator. We're on our way to God as our hope and our goal and our joy. And we find ourselves in this earth on a journey from God to God. We find ourselves walking, we're pilgrims on a journey. And I think that applies to all of us and all people who have some sense of being on some sort of journey. And I find that it's really helpful in my own clinical work not to ask when I'm in a situation like what's broken and needs to be fixed, or even like how can I fix this person or reduce these symptoms, although that's important. But next slide, to ask like what's needed right now for the journey that this person's on, as I myself am on a journey, I'm coming alongside them. And that's a really helpful question to ask for me, because sometimes the answer is medication, sometimes the answer is a hospitalization, sometimes the answer is to get out of an abusive relationship, sometimes the answer is to have access to secure housing, or to healthy food, or to a community that says you belong here, and we value you and affirm you and welcome you. Sometimes it's not the medical things that count the most, it's the community things. But I think that it's a broad question that we can ask each other. And the fourth affirmation is that we find our fulfillment not in control, in bringing the world continuously under control, but in wonder. I want to be a little bit nuanced in how I say this. I want to be careful, because I work at the VA with a lot of trauma survivors. I know from their experience and from my own experience that when you've lived in a world that's been uncontrollable and dangerous, like basic control over our lives and our bodies, over our surroundings is really important. So control is a good thing. Control is not a bad thing in itself. But if we live in the world always just seeking control over ourselves, over our bodies, especially over others and the bodies of others, over the world around us, and that's the goal, is just to keep things cinched down and under control, then we're going to find ourselves giving a lot of authority to whomever or whatever has put us in that position of control. I think that's maybe what's happening in a lot of our politics and other things. It's like that cinching down, giving a lot of authority to those whom we perceive has put us in a position of control. And that's pretty much the Bible's definition of idolatry. If you look to somebody or something or some system for control that's not God, then you're going to eventually give a lot of authority to that thing or person or system. So I think it's important as Christians to recognize that yes, control is a good, and the control that we can gain over our experiences through techniques and therapies is a good, but what we're called to is not control, but it's love, to become deeper lovers of God, to become deeper lovers of others. And so like in the way that we engage mental health care, the way that we provide mental health care, are we becoming deeper and better lovers of God and of those around us whom God has given us to love, and of the world around us? And I think that's a question that Christians can ask ourselves. Next slide. So this leads to two ways of seeing. And I would just encourage us to think about how can our imaginations be formed through the work of a ministry like the one we're hearing about tonight. One way of seeing that was very common to my training as a physician and as a psychiatrist is that mental health problems are individual problems. They reflect dysfunction in the brain and body. They're best treated with technical therapeutic interventions. That's one way of seeing. Or we can see mental health challenges as mental health problems as challenges faced by wayfarers, embodied, relational, loved creatures of earth who are on a journey to God. If we walk alongside each other and think of ourselves as wayfarers who are just facing challenges, and think about what's needed right now for the journey, I think that leads us to the kind of place where we can begin to think in a healthy and healing way, not only about ourselves and our own communities, but to the broader communities in which we live. Next slide. I want to just finish with a couple of thoughts. One is the need to not only think about ourselves as collections of symptoms, but to think about the need for story. I put this slide here because this is a wonderful book, first of all, Christ on the Psych Ward by David Finnegan Hosey, who's now a pastor in the Richmond area. But I put it in here because I actually met David at Edenton Street a few years ago at a conference on theology and disability. He was here, and we met for the first time here and have since continued a relationship. But this book is lovely because it tells the story of his own experience as a seminarian at Wesley Theological Seminary in D.C., being hospitalized twice and then once later with what was initially called depression and then bipolar disorder, and his own living as a Christian with these struggles. And it's a beautifully written book, and I'd recommend it to you. But one of the things that David says in this, he tells a story of when he was hospitalized for, I think, a third time, and a psychiatrist said, "I actually don't think what you have is depression. I think you have bipolar disorder." And he's like, "What are you talking about? Everybody has told me that I have depression. Are you trying to mess with me?" And the psychiatrist said, "Listen, patient histories are stories. I'm trying to write a story I like here. Stories lead supposedly to diagnoses, and diagnoses supposedly lead to treatment." And the question he asked is how can we tell a better story that's going to be good and lead to a helpful path forward? I think at its best, the work of diagnosis and formulation, all the stuff we learn in the clinical world is just a question of how do we tell truthful and helpful stories? I think that's where we need to be thinking. And then next, not just story, but I think this way of thinking leads us into the need not just to think individualistically, but into the need for community. And just since this is a new kind of mental health ministry, this is a new kind of institution that's being formed tonight, I want to close by just reminding us that Christians have been in this work for a long time. Next slide. The church, the book of Ephesians tells us, is the place where the wisdom of God in its rich variety may be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. How can we think of the church as a place of not only discipleship, but of innovation that makes a difference for the world around us? Next slide. So I just want to say that we talked about how mental health problems can sometimes be problems of disconnection. When I read Hari's book, I was so excited because I thought, this is like a recipe for what the church should be doing in the world of mental health. One is to lead people into the right kinds of treatment, which is exactly what you all are here about tonight. But more broadly than that, it's how can the church be a place where people who feel disconnected, communities that feel disconnected, can be reconnected to meaningful work, to other people, to safe engagement with childhood trauma, to meaningful values, to status and respect, to the natural world, to a hopeful future. How can the church be a place where what's been disconnected and where people are struggling and suffering from that disconnection can be reconnected? Next. I just want to finish with 3 really brief accounts, just to again remind us that Christians are not new to this. Matter of fact, a lot of the things that we just take for granted in the world of mental health actually came from Christians seeing a need around them and acting out of their Christian commitments to try to do better than what they saw around them. One example is the community in Belgium called Geel, or Hale, G-H-E-E-L. It was a place, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but it was a place where there was a story of a woman who fled there from an abusive relationship, who ended up having her grave in this community in Belgium. And this community in the Middle Ages, beginning in the 13th, 14th century, became a place where people would come for healing at the shrine of her grave, St. Dymphna. And the people in the community around began to take pilgrims into their homes, and they would live in their homes for a long period of time. And Hale is looked at as the birthplace of community psychiatry, community mental health care. But initially it was just Christian farmers saying hey, these people are coming to this shrine for healing, let's include them in our community. Next slide. Not only the first hospitals, but the first what we might consider psychiatric hospitals in the Western world were often founded out of places of particular need. So this is a 19th century painting of a time in Valencia, Spain in 1409 when a Spanish friar, Juan Gilberto Joffre, was walking on the streets of Valencia. He saw a man being beaten who was obviously cognitively impaired, maybe psychotic, we're not sure. But the crowd was beating him. He put himself between the crowd and this man. He told them to stop. He took the man to his chapter house. He then went to the cathedral, so a place maybe not that unlike Edenton Street or other churches here in downtown Raleigh, and preached to the business people of Valencia at that time. And he said, we can't be a community that allows this to happen. We must have an institution that provides care for people like this. And out of that came the Hospital for the Holy Innocents, which was one of the first, if not the first, dedicated psychiatric hospitals in the Western world. The last story I'll tell, the next slide. The Quakers in England in the late early 1800s, at a time when psychiatric hospitals were urban and very prison-like, the Quakers saw one of their own young women in their community dying in one of these really dirty, cramped, urban, prison-like facilities. They said, we can do better than this. So they convinced somebody to basically donate an estate in York, in England, and they called it the York Retreat. It was a place where they said, maybe people will heal not through being in urban, really dirty, cramped, prison-like settings, but maybe people will heal in connection with nature and the surrounding world and being treated with dignity and peace. And so this became like the model for having people out in nature. And so when 50 years later, the state of North Carolina built a building on the top of a hill in what was at that point like way out of downtown Raleigh, and it was became Dorothea Dix Hospital. It was following this idea that originally came from Quakers saying, like, we can do better than this. So I think as we look at the world of mental health care that in so many ways seems to be broken, how can we as Christians look out in the world and say, we can do better because we have this deep well to draw from? So with that, I just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for your commitment to this work. Thanks for Amanda and your team for this. I think we have a few minutes for questions, and then I look forward to the rest of the program to come. So thank you. I think we have maybe 5 or 7 minutes for questions. Is that all right? So yeah, I'll repeat questions because I know it's a big room and may not be able to hear. And there's a mic to pass along around, I think. If y'all are like me, you're ready to get to the next act. So I'm aiming for that. So, yeah. Yes.
I heard a couple of podcasts. It was Dr. Chris Palmer, psychiatrist at Harvard University, and one of his treatments is the relationship between diet, metabolism, and brain function. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, the role of diet, metabolism, and brain function in thinking about mental health treatments. I think, I think it's really important. I mean, thinking about diet is really important for a number of reasons. And I think that it's something that I got almost none of in my psychiatric training, and I was a medical student at Harvard. There just wasn't much there. Now I think that's more the case, that there's more attention. But nutritional psychiatry is still a very developing area. But I would just say, so without going into the specific details of how this is important, one, it is important, but it's not just important because eating seafood and greens and other things give us certain kinds of nutrients that our brains need. That's part of it. But it's also because it's not just what we eat and the chemicals that we eat, but it's how we eat and with whom we eat and the meaning that food has for us. So I think when we think about the food and mental health, it's part of it's just what we put into our bodies in terms of whether it's healthy food, whether it's not food that's laced with chemicals and high fructose corn syrup and that kind of thing. But it's also what's the meaning of food for us? People have a really complicated relationship with food because sometimes food is associated with a lot of pain, or sometimes food is associated with memories of relationships. Sometimes food can be used for control of ourselves or others. And food can also be used for comfort. And so I think paying attention to how, as those who have relationships with food, what that means, I think it's really important to engage. So thanks for bringing that up. Thank you. Yes?
I don't need Mike. What is your opinion of the impact social media is having on mental health?
I'm so glad my kids are not here. This isn't being recorded, is it? I'm just kidding. Yeah. Social media, yeah. Well, I think we probably all have a lot of opinions about the social media, but I would just say one is I think we live in a world that it's just a part of our lives and our world. So how do we live with it well and in a healthy way. And it's clear to me that we're not often living with it well and in a healthy way. I do follow and I agree with the analysis of the researcher Jean Twenge, who has a lot of work out on adolescent and young adult mental health. She looks, and I've seen this too in college student mental health surveys, that it tracks pretty much the same with teenagers and with college students, but just say with college students, you begin to see an uptick in rates of depression and of anxiety, and actually of thoughts of suicide in about the year 2012, 2013, that's continued up until now. Like, it's been this ongoing increase of rates. Now, that is probably due to multiple reasons, and one of those reasons is because kids like, young adults and adolescents are more willing to name their experience through the language of mental health, and they're more willing to seek treatment, so there's decreased stigma about seeking treatment. So some of it is just a kind of naming effect, like there's more willingness to use these names and labels and words. But it's not all that. There's also increasing distress, and any of you that work on college campuses, I'm sure, feel this and know this. What Twenge argues is that there's been a lot that's happened in the last 10 years in the United States that might lead people to feel anxious and depressed, including, increased attention to racialized violence, Me Too, all of our politics, all of polarization, all of that's happening. But to think about why would there be an inflection point in 2012, 2013, the best explanation for what happened then in our culture that wasn't happening in the 5 years before that was it was the first year when pretty much everyone had universal access to smartphones and to social media platforms. And so you began to see, so when we began to kind of pour our lives into social media is when you begin to see these upticks. And I think Twenge is probably right about that. There's no way to know for sure. And so I think that the challenge for us is to think about, like, how do we, and I struggle with this with myself, but also with my kids, is how do we think about, how do we approach technology in general and social media specifically in ways that are life-giving and healthy? Social media can be really important for kids and adolescents who feel alone. It can be ways of seeking connection to others. It can be ways of getting really good information out. There's lots of good uses for it. And I think we all know that it can send people into spirals of isolation and shame and loneliness, and it's something I think is going to be an ongoing challenge for us. Thank you. We have time for maybe one more question. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious of how do you make space for the clients to talk about these sorts of things. I always tell people I'm not a Christian counselor. I'm a Christian who happens to be a counselor.
Yeah.
And so, like, do you have any advice for creating space to have these conversations with clients, especially for those of us that work in more secular sort of settings?
Yeah. Well, so I work this morning I was at the Durham VA seeing patients in my mental health clinic office there, and so I work in a government system and a very secular system, and I think probably you could tell me as well, and I think we could tell stories to each other, but I think for me as a psychiatrist who, like, it's a matter of not immediately going to the check boxes, including like asking people the things I have to ask them about their medications and symptoms and thoughts of other certain things, but it's more stopping first when somebody comes into my office and saying, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for coming in. It's really good to see you. How have things been going? And then just stopping. And my experience is that just a little bit of space to just stop and hearing what people are saying when they come in and trying to understand that, it helps a lot. So this doesn't just feel like it's just about, looking at the screen and checking off boxes and doing performance measures, that kind of thing. And certainly, I also always ask people, like, what's causing you stress right now? Because people will come in and talk about how they're not sleeping, or they'll talk about something, but it's like, what else is causing you stress? And so, today, not to give any specific details, but I had a patient who had several things that, like, he's like, I just feel anxious. I'm not sure why. Like, things are going okay. But when we started talking, it's that he lives in a rural area. He's a farmer. He's facing a lot of structural challenges to being a small farmer, and in this case he's African American, and so there's a lot of like racial structural biases in his county related to the farming loan system. That's what we talked about, you know, and it was really, really important for me to hear that, you know, from him. So, thank you. I think we had one more question back here. I want to honor whoever had the mic. Yes.
So when you were talking about the general uptick in diagnostic, mental health diagnoses, and you suggested that maybe we might want to think about that in regard to the whole business of disconnection. And I really wanted to applaud you. And I wondered if you could say more about that.
Yeah. You mean specifically about how the diagnoses related to need to attend to disconnection? Is that right? Yeah. I think it's important when we use diagnoses like depression, anxiety. I'm pulling those just because they're so common, but other things too. And I think maybe especially those two. Let me stop at depression and anxiety for now. Both of those names name a wide range of experience. So somebody can be depressed and can be literally unable to get out of bed, unable to feed themselves, and there are people who are depressed in Raleigh right now who feel that way. And then there's some people who are depressed in the context of just a long journey with unresolved trauma. Some people are depressed in the context of just a lot of losses in their lives. And these are related, but they're not all the same thing. And so I think it's important that when we use a word like depression or anxiety, we've given a description, but we haven't given an explanation. So to say that someone's depressed is not like, oh, now I know what's happening with me. I'm depressed. Therefore, I know what's going on. All you've done is you've named the fact that, yes, I now recognize that I'm depressed. But the secondary question is, well, what's going on that's contributing to my feeling this way? And that could be biological factors. It could be medical illnesses. It could be stresses in relationships. It could be losses. It could be past trauma. It could be a whole bunch of things. But I think that it could be living in a community that feels frayed and disconnected and lonely. But I think it's getting to those kinds of questions that's the work of good therapy, and I think also the work of the church. Thank you all so much. Really grateful for being here, and I'm excited about what's to come.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kinghorn. The longer I live, the more certain I am that some of the very best things in life are very unexpected. This has been true in my family relationships, in my friendships, and of course in my work. So to say that the well has been an unplanned adventure would be putting it very mildly. And while I don't doubt that I've been unknowingly preparing for this work for my entire life, the very first whisperings of this dream came to me incredibly clearly in the middle of the night on March 25th, 2021. So this is the story of the well, starting on March 25th, 2021. We were a year into the COVID-19 pandemic, if you'll remember that with me, which began 9 months after I graduated from seminary, so I had plenty of time to prepare for that. My work as an associate pastor at a local church included leading the youth group, and I just remember thinking in those first couple of weeks, after we all sort of realized it wasn't just going to be a couple of weeks, that I was going to have to watch this really healthy and vital youth program just crumble. Because how could we lead a church, let alone a group of 40-something teenagers online? How could we do that work? How could we do the work of discipleship via Zoom? How could we maintain any kind of substantial engagement in the life of the church? Much to my surprise, the unexpected happened. Not only did our youth group continue to thrive between Sunday and Wednesday Zoom calls, but we also had students who became more involved, students who were leading, students who were inviting their friends, so we were meeting new students. Our youth group grew in the lockdown. Didn't make any sense at all, but that's what happened. Because in our virtual youth group, these kids found a break from the monotony of being at home, from the monotony of doing everything online, for a chance to connect as much as was possible at the time, and just this opportunity to be human beings, to be children together. So along with that increased engagement, with these young people came stronger relationships with their parents, many of whom were deeply concerned about the mental health of their children. Starting in April of 2020, so just about a month after the lockdown began, I started to have at least weekly conversations with parents who were seeing signs of anxiety and depression, and even at times suicidal ideation in their previously healthy kids. And so as I was trained to do, I did my best to refer these families to qualified mental health practitioners in the area as best I could. But what we kept running into was this reality that everyone was facing, that there was this sudden and intense increase in demand for qualified mental health care and a very limited number of licensed mental health practitioners nearby. And when we could find them, it was a question of insurance and affordability and accessibility. It was a question of, could we make it work? And oftentimes the answer was no. So this wasn't and isn't just a local issue, by the way, as the statistics that Dr. Kinghorn cited align with these statistics. Studies estimate that nearly half of all Americans will experience some sort of mental or behavioral health issue in their lifetime, half. So that would be half of this room standing up right now. And in March of 2023, more than 160 million Americans lived in areas in this country with observable deficiencies in a number of mental health practitioners. So it's a ton of people who just don't have access to good mental health care in our country. And so in addition to the immense loss and grief and the collective trauma that we were all experiencing during that season, this was what kept me up at night that year. Between March of 2020 and March of 2021, that's what kept me up at night, was just this struggle that I was trying to connect these families in our church who were really suffering and struggling with care that they could actually access. It felt like an impossible challenge in my ministry. It felt crushing. And so I found myself lying awake, closing in on midnight on March 25th, 2021, staring at the ceiling and troubled by this insurmountable challenge in my work. And then all of a sudden, with the kind of unexpected clarity that seems to only come to me in the middle of the night, I had an epiphany, and it came in a series of questions. What if we could build a model of church that incorporated mental health care right in the middle of that community? What if we invited mental health practitioners to set up shop in our giant empty buildings, to care for our congregants and for those outside of the church who are also very much inside of our parish? I was reminded of John Wesley, like the good Methodist that I am, whose wisdom says that the whole world is our parish. And I felt that that was very much true, especially when it comes to the work of caring for the mental health of the community. So this initial flash of an idea was met with also a wave of disappointment. Great idea, Amanda, but how are you going to make it happen? I wasn't, nor would I likely ever become a qualified mental health professional, and so not all of us can go to divinity school and medical school. That's it's just for the overachievers. So the question was, how would I possibly pull off this kind of experiment without that training, without that expertise? Thankfully, as is often true, my brain was working faster than my heart and than my spirit was in that moment. And the second epiphany came to me shortly thereafter. I realized that I could seek certification as a spiritual director. So I had been engaging with a spiritual director who's here tonight since my graduation from seminary in 2019, and it is a process that's completely transformed my life. Theologian and author Barbara Brown Taylor often asks the question, what is saving your life right now? And for me, that answer is always spiritual direction. It was transformative, spiritually and mentally and even physically. We sometimes joke in the spiritual direction world that the experience is like Jesus therapy, which is a joke, and it's always quickly followed by the clarification that it is decidedly not therapy. We are not trained therapists. But actually, spiritual direction is a great addition to therapy or counseling or psychiatry. So spiritual direction is this ancient religious practice and a form of intentional companionship between a trained director and a spiritual seeker. That is someone who is seeking greater spiritual depth and understanding, and this work typically takes place in one-on-one, hour-long meetings once a month. So it feels a lot like therapy, but the approach is very different. Rather than a clinical approach, it's a relational and spiritual approach. And so in a typical spiritual direction session, director and seeker spend time in meditation or prayer. an intentional conversation directing their attention to the spiritual life of the seeker and to the presence of the divine, or however they would talk about that presence in their life. So this is an ideal form of care for people of any faith who are interested in growing and maturing their spirituality. And so the folks who look for spiritual direction are often people who are discerning, people who are in transition, people who are experiencing spiritual or emotional uncertainty, sometimes people who are deconstructing their Christian faith in one way or another, people who are looking to heal from spiritual wounds or reconnect with spirituality are also really great candidates for spiritual direction. And it's also incredibly healing for pastors, as it was for me at this super strange time in my ministry, at the beginning of my ministry, in the midst of that pandemic, this pandemic. And so as soon as I figured that part out and realized that I could seek this training, my brain also jumped to the next piece of this puzzle. I knew that even with that training, I couldn't do this work alone. And I didn't have the knowledge or the experience or the understanding of the mental health field that I would need to be successful in sort of pulling off this grand experiment. And I remember laughing out loud when it finally came to me just a few moments later that, of course, I wouldn't be doing this alone. I would be doing it with Elizabeth. So Elizabeth and I met on the first day of our college classes. We lived in the same dorm hall, and we were instant friends. And if you know Elizabeth, you know that they have this calming energy. That's us. This is the most ridiculous picture in the whole wide world. That is me in my vestments and Elizabeth in all of their fullness. And this is just the epitome of our friendship. This is what we look like. We're very, very different, and yet we have found at the beginning of our friendship, and we continue to find this spiritual resonance, despite the fact that I am a Christian pastor and Elizabeth is decidedly not Christian, but deeply spiritual. We find this spiritual resonance that has always drawn us closer together and always drawn us to wonder what it would look like to work together and to collaborate to create something new and different in order to offer healing to other people in our respective fields. So Elizabeth's field is as a therapist. I always tease them about their therapist voice. It's very calming. So if you know Elizabeth, you've probably been on the receiving end of the therapist voice at some point. But they also have this playfully creative streak that's like a mile wide and a sense of adventure that would be required for someone like Elizabeth to be willing to do an experiment like this with me in a place like this. So it became really clear at about midnight, I guess on March 25th, that I was supposed to do this with Elizabeth. So wrapped up in the midst of this strange epiphany, I thought it might be nice of me to let Elizabeth know that they were going to be doing this with me. So I took a chance and I sent this text message to Elizabeth, who at the time was living in Iowa and completing a doctorate in couple and family therapy. So I went back to find that text message. You'll see it on the screen. You can see that it's timestamped for 12:34 a.m., super normal time to send a really long message to your friend. And it is a very long message. This is just like the first third of it. There was a lot more. Those of you who have ever exchanged messages with me are probably like, yep, that checks out. No such thing as a short conversation with Amanda. So I was prepared to settle in for a long wait when my phone went off and I got a text message back immediately. As it turns out, Elizabeth couldn't sleep that night either. And they picked up the phone and called me. And we spent the next 2 hours laying out a plan for what would over the next 3 years become the well, mental, and spiritual care. We didn't get a lot of sleep that night, but it didn't matter. We had no idea when or how this would happen, if it would ever happen, or if there would ever be a church crazy enough to take a chance on us. 2 20-somethings, a United Methodist pastor, and a not Christian but deeply spiritual therapist who were dreaming big dreams about changing the landscape of mental health in the church and beyond. Since that time, God has been incredibly faithful. Door after door has opened for the well to take shape. Person after person has been sent our way. Exactly the right people at exactly the right time, which was never in my timing, but has always been in God's timing. We are particularly grateful for a few people tonight. We're grateful for Reverend Greg Moore and for Sarah Capel, whose leadership in this church has carved out a path for the well to come in and to be received with ease and with joy in this congregation. We are grateful for Rabbi Dr. Lisa Vendeland, who through a network of chatty grandmothers here in Raleigh, heard about the well and came to us. We did not even know about Rabbi Dr. Lisa until she reached out to us. And she was ready and willing to offer psychotherapeutic services in alignment with our mission. Our new favorite joke is that when there's healing that needs to be done, God always sends a rabbi. So now we have our rabbi. We're so grateful for her. We're grateful for Greta Martin, who is our newest team member and our new primary therapist, who felt compelled enough by the well to join this work and become a collaborator with us. And we're grateful for Reverend Tim Catlett and Jill Murphy from the Office of New Faith Communities and the North Carolina Conference of the UMC, who heard our vision early on when we still didn't know what we were doing. Spoiler alert, we still don't know what we're doing, but they took a chance on us, and they've done everything in their power to make this dream a reality. So here we are, celebrating the launch of the well, and it feels important to share with you the vision that God has given to us through these doors that have opened and through these people that have been sent to us unexpectedly. The mission of the well is to create pathways toward healing and wholeness in the community by offering accessible and affordable mental and spiritual care. And our vision is to see restoration and liberation and resurrection take root in our community, which begins, of course, here in our church, but extends out into Raleigh and beyond. If you had asked me as recently as 3 years ago where I would be in 2024, working as the executive director of a nonprofit organization would have probably been toward the end of that list. That was never the plan. The invitation into this work has come to me as an utter surprise. And yet God continues to remind me that it is not really just my vision or my dream. It's not mine and Elizabeth's. It's so much bigger than that. So after we can prove that this crazy experiment will work here at Edenton Street, which we hope that it will, our hope is not to just expand and create a massive practice here. In my estimation, the well at Edenton Street will always probably be a relatively small practice of mental health care and spiritual care. But instead of expanding here, our big dream in the next 5 to 10 years is to find ways to partner with other churches in the community to create hubs of the well in local congregations across the Triangle. So what we've learned, and what any mental health practitioner and spiritual director worth their salt will tell you, is that there will never be enough mental health care. There will never be enough spiritual care in our communities. Even if every single church, which we're in North Carolina, there's a lot of those. Even if every single one of them housed some version of the well in their buildings, we would still need to find creative and innovative ways to care for the spiritual and mental health of our communities. So we are certainly not the only congregation and practice partner together in this way, but we really do want to be a part of building a network of more versions of the well, whether they have our name or not, in the future. We want more churches to do this work of caring for the mental health and the spiritual health of their communities with great intentionality and with partners who are qualified and compassionate in the way that they offer care. So our hope is to create this network both by leveraging these unused resources in churches. Edenton Street is a place where the space that exists here is used beautifully throughout the week, so it feels a little bit more like the exception than the rule, but there's so many churches whose buildings sit empty from Monday to Saturday, and this is such an incredible way to utilize that space, to leverage that space for the sake of care. But we also want to connect with other existing mental health practices and other spiritual directors to join this already really thriving network of care that exists in the Triangle, not just in Raleigh, but also in Chapel Hill and in Durham and beyond. So if you are here tonight as a mental health practitioner, this is your invitation to please introduce yourself to our team. Here in just a few minutes, you'll have the opportunity to do so. We would love to connect with you to talk more about what it looks like to be connected and to build this network of care for our communities. To wrap up, I'll just share that because the well came to me as this unexpected invitation, I'm constantly being reminded that this work of creating pathways for mental and spiritual care in communities is more important now than it ever has been before. I'm deeply convicted of that, and I probably wouldn't be doing this if I didn't believe that with my whole heart. And I'm super humbled and really grateful to get to do this work here and now. And I'm really grateful to all of you for being here and for being invested in this conversation. I think it's going to take all of us in this room and so many more people to really begin to address the great needs that are around us in our community, and I think that's the invitation that Christ is offering to us. It is my privilege now to introduce to you my best friend and business partner, Dr. Elizabeth Waters. Elizabeth is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a PhD in couple and family therapy from the University of Iowa, which is like the program, if you don't know. In addition to working as the therapy director of The Well and as the president of our board, they are a researcher and professor at Alliant International University in California. So they teach there remotely and then sometimes travel for in-person teaching. They're also an adjunct professor at East Carolina University, just up the road. And they specialize in exploring and working with the impact of systemic trauma and adverse childhood experiences across the lifespan. So Elizabeth is passionate about increased accessibility to trauma-informed knowledge and care, to treatment and to healing in marginalized communities specifically. Their work with the LGBTQ communities in rural Iowa was transformative before they moved here to do this crazy work with me. And they bring so much knowledge and expertise and passion to our team. They'll share more with you about the values and the clinical approaches we'll take at The Well. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Waters.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you everyone for being here with us tonight, for our wonderful guest speaker who taught me so much as I think about teaching what it means to diagnose and work in mental health even tonight as we get ready to launch this nonprofit practice together. I'd like to begin to talk about, as Amanda shared, our values, which were born out of our friendship and our community together, which has been deeply healing to me personally over the past going on 12 years now of our life together. Our first value at The Well is healing and wholeness. We believe in access to mental health care because we believe it's a human right. Everyone deserves to seek the healing that they need, and so many of us are in need of healing today in our society, especially those of us who have been historically and historical and present day marginalization and oppression due to systemic power, privileges, and those who hold these and do a lot of harm in our society against us. And so because of that, we also believe in accessibility to care. What does it mean to actually break down these systemic barriers that continue to be pervasive in our society today and have a commitment to building sustainable, collaborative, community-based relationships by forming partnerships, inviting in experts and practitioners who are committed to this type of work, and really embodying also our third value of social justice and equity. There's so much injustice in our society, and so we want to make very clear today as we launch this nonprofit practice our commitment to stand in solidarity with all of these communities who have been oppressed, particularly the BIPOC community, the AAPI community, and the LGBTQI2S+ communities. Because we are members of these communities, and we deserve to be seen, and we deserve to have a hub of wholeness and wellness where we are unapologetically ourselves and speak to these issues that contribute to the mental health issues we continue to face. Our fourth belonging building on this, or our fourth value building on this, it's been a long week, forgive me, is belongingness, because we want to build community and have a place that feels like home and feels like an extension and feels like you are welcomed in. And that is something I never thought I would be doing with Amanda out of a church building because of my own lived experiences, but here we are, and I can say that Edenton Street has been so welcoming, and I believe that we will continue to extend that practice of inviting people in and ensuring that this is a safe place for them to build community with us. Because of this, we have found a wonderful team of practitioners to work with, and so I would love the opportunity to kind of introduce each of them and talk a little bit about what we will be offering. So we will be offering evidence-based services and wonderful therapeutic models to individuals, couples, and families at The Well. We will also be offering educational and spiritual classes and spiritual direction, which Amanda talked about earlier. Leading all of these different modalities of classes, individual therapy, psychotherapy, and education will be our staff, who I will now introduce. Starting off, you've already met Reverend Amanda Rigby, who's my wonderful partner and executive director of The Well. We also have Sarah Chappell here with us this evening, who you'll hear more about momentarily, who serves on the board, and Beth Bordeaux, who also serves on the board, and who brings an incredible amount of experience and nonprofit expertise to our team. Our team consists of Greta Martin, our wonderful full-time therapist who's starting and also here with us this evening. Greta is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of North Carolina and graduated with her degree in a Master of Social Work from NC State University's program. Greta brings years of experience as a therapist and educator, and we are so incredibly blessed to have her with us. We also, as Amanda mentioned earlier, have Rabbi Dr. Lisa Vanderkolk, I cannot speak this evening, but who's both an ordained rabbi and medical doctor who is serving currently as our psychotherapist intern. And yet, ironically, Lisa has probably the most training and experience out of any of us in the Well. She is just an incredible gift to us as well. And we are continually learning from Lisa and her expertise as she partners with us. We then also have our spiritual direction team. This also consists of Reverend Amanda Rigby, and then Reverend Joyce Kaufman, who, in addition to being a certified spiritual director, is a Reiki practitioner and death doula and dream worker. She has over 35 years of experience as a Christian educator, a spiritual companion, and a small group facilitator. And she brings intentionality in holding space for all, and especially for those challenged by early life trauma, and she will also be holding a wonderful aging and spirituality class that I hope you all consider signing up for or referring individuals to. Then we also have Sarah Capel, who is also one of our spiritual director team members and serves on our board again. And Sarah holds a Master in Arts in Christian Practice from Duke Divinity School and a law degree from University of Virginia. And Sarah's great joy in life is building and nurturing holistic relationships. And I can speak to this directly. Sarah has been such a gift in my life and to the Well and to Amanda and I. And then we also have Ivy Parker, who holds a Master's in Arts in Christian Practice from Duke Divinity School. As a seasoned spiritual companion, Ivy embraces a deep call for walking alongside others as they seek to draw closer to the divine and become all that God has created them to be. And finally, we have Lindsay Stevenson, who completed her training at the NC Institute for Spiritual Direction and Formation, and she is passionate about helping others feel known, seen, and loved. She welcomes those desiring a deeper connection with God in the midst of everyday life, who seek a safe space to name their longings, joys, and struggles, and all seeking spiritual care for the deepest and truest parts of themselves. In addition to spiritual direction, Lindsay has served on the staff at her church and teaches in a public school system. This incredible team of mental and spiritual health practitioners has already begun their amazing work, work that will gain so much more momentum now that we are officially launched and can begin advertising our services, and hopefully, as you already heard, how we got connected to Lisa, word of mouth really matters. Your participation in building this community with us really matters. And so we invite you all to share the story that you've heard here today, and to also talk about, as you communicate with others about what we're doing here, how we're going to do this sustainably. So the last bit that I want to share with you all is our plan for sustainability at the Well. We, of course, will always welcome donations. These donations can help offset the cost of therapy for those seeking services. We also plan to, once we get our 501c3 status finally approved from the government after the months of delay, we will begin actively applying for federal grants. Grant initiatives are one of the most sustainable ways that we can bring in therapy interns to provide free and reduced services, and also begin to have a fund of money to offset services for clients that do not have insurance or cannot afford a copay or cannot pay out of pocket. So our hope is to continue to pay our therapists well while also providing free and reduced services. Along with that, the Well is also already a site for counseling and therapy students to practice at a reduced cost, like the services Lisa is already kindly providing for us. And we plan to continue to partner with local universities to be a site that can house students so that they get training in providing equitable, free and reduced services, especially working and providing gender-affirming services with the queer community and other marginalized and oppressed communities as well, if they are committed to serving those populations. And so through these partnerships, through grant funding and through your donations, we hope that the Well will continue to prosper and provide these services for a long time to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Waters. I'd like to introduce our final speaker for the evening, Beth Bordeaux. Beth holds a Master of Social Work degree from UNC Chapel Hill. So I think we have folks from Duke, NC State, and UNC on our staff. She has 34 years of experience working in human services, and specifically extensive experience working in services supporting unhoused individuals and families, as well as looking at the root system level issues that impact homelessness. And in all of Beth's work, she draws on core skills and values from coaching and social work, meeting people where they are, honoring the self-knowledge and personal agency of all people, and building trust with generosity, vulnerability, integrity, and openness. Beth is also a dear friend, and it is a joy to welcome her to share briefly about why she's involved with the Well and about how you can be too. After Beth is finished sharing, we are going to journey downstairs for a brief ribbon cutting. It'll take 1 second. It's going to be a little bit chaotic, so feel free to, if you're not about the ribbon cutting, you can stay up here and mingle. But our practitioners will also be downstairs waiting and ready to shake your hand and meet you and give you a business card. So if you'd like to learn more about the services that we offer, meet the wonderful team that you've just been introduced to, stick around for just a moment after Beth's done and come downstairs with us to see our offices at the Well, to cut the ribbon, and to shake our hands. But thank you so much for being here, and I'd like to invite up Beth to bring us home tonight.
Thank you. So Amanda asked me if I would tell why. What is my why? Why do I want to be involved with the Well? Why am I serving on the board? Why does it matter? So for me, I gave this a little thought, and I actually can't do just one why, so I came up with 4. And I'll begin with, I started, instead of having resolutions, a few years ago, I started to pick a word that was my intent for the year. A lot of folks are doing that these days. So right after the pandemic, again, I couldn't do one word. I had to do 2 words. So my 2 words, and I've already heard them in someone's talk tonight, was deconstruction and reconstruction. So I don't know if this is a midlife thing or what, but it seemed like everything that all of who I thought I was, everything that was the root of me needed to just be torn apart, broken down, uprooted, removed. And then this space left needed to be reimagined and redesigned and reformed by my values, formed by love and community, and by a spiritual energy that is creation. So part of my why is because I couldn't do this work alone, and I found a partner through spiritual direction. Second thing, my second why. I've spent my career, as Amanda said so nicely, as a social worker. Early intervention, public health, mental health, addiction services, later working with people and families in crisis, sleeping outside without a home, hungry, without money for food, experiencing trauma or living with trauma that they experienced in the past. So part of my why is because the ability to pay should never be a barrier to health care, mental health care, or spiritual health care. Y'all are reinforcing something I'm going to say later, so just so you know. Number 3, I have a close family member who struggled with depression and anxiety, and it almost took her life. DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, saved that life and mine and our relationship. So part of my why is because it's personal. Number 4. At one point in my life, I prayed that God would bring people into my life to help me understand some of the things that I didn't understand. I asked that God would bring people, specifically people that I thought of as different from me, who did things that I didn't understand and who believed things that I didn't understand. And I found over the course of a few years that my whole friendship base began to change. And now I had more friends that I would have called different than I had of those friends that I would have called similar. And I'm better for it. And I understand more what it means to be on the margins or to not be included. And so part of my why is because I've discovered that we need to draw closer to those that we have pushed aside. So my hunch is, and y'all have already proven this, that everyone in this room has a reason why. You have a reason why you came here tonight. You have a reason why when you heard about the well, you were curious and you wanted to know more. Or you had a reason why you might actually want to get involved. You want to do more to make this work happen. You want to follow a group that has the kind of values that you heard about tonight, the values of healing and wholeness and of accessibility, of care and social justice and equity and belonging. So while you all are thinking about your why, I want to let you know of a few opportunities. So Elizabeth has already shared some of them. It's not on the board anymore, but it's on your nice, handy, dandy program for tonight on the back. You can visit our website and you can share with us. You can share with us some support for this work that we're doing. So that's one way that one opportunity for how you can help. But there's another opportunity. We're actually forming a committee, which my role on the board, I get the pleasure of leading this committee, that's going to be not just about fundraising, but also about engaging the community and helping the well to connect with the broader community. So helping us to connect with the broader community, and oh, by the way, we also are going to need funds to keep this thing going. But connection is really what it's all about. The funds will follow. So we want to form this committee, and we want some folks to help meet with us. We're only going to meet a few times a year to make some plans and see things to fruition. And the more engaged you want to be, there'll be opportunities, right? So this is how we're starting. So if anyone's interested in joining that kind of group, let me know. I'll be downstairs with the rest. Or, just pop onto the website. There's always a way. There's a form there on the website you can connect with us. And then, so one is you can give us financial donations, right? You can help us financially. You can do that tonight before you leave. You can do it, I think there's a basket somewhere. Surely out of all of us, there'll be a place for you to hand some money if you want to. But you can, or you can do it online. You can get involved and help us get the word out. You can share with others what you've heard tonight and that kind of thing, and help us connect with the community. And the third thing is, if you yourself are actually looking for a deeper connection, if you are looking for spiritual direction, or you're just curious about it, there's actually things, we have like a silent auction out there, and you can sign up and bid on one of the sessions with one of our therapists or one of our spiritual directors, and that'll give you a taste of it. Maybe you're curious about this, and maybe it's something you've been thinking about for a while, but it's hard to take that step. So we're offering this as a way for folks to make a first step, to learn about it, get more connected, and take a try at it. So that's all I've got. We appreciate you guys being here. We're going to head down. Is Amanda she's going to point you the way. She's right there at the door to point you the way, to go downstairs and do the ribbon cutting and meet and greet, and we appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you very much.